So they both felt, that by being angry, by refusing, by being upset, that's called grieving. No, that's called being upset. To really grieve means consider what the soul is going through and what the soul needs from you now. The relationship is not over. So I came to Minnesota in 1970 to see what I could do to inspire some people there. And my first student at the university was a young woman by the name of Friedman. Her family was not terribly observant, but slowly they became more and more observant. By the end of the year, they had taken on many mitzvahs, and tragically, her father passed away. So they asked that Chabad should take care of the funeral. So we did. There were 3 Chabad rabbis there. Now, she had a sister who had been away at school for the entire year and didn't know that her sister and her mother had become more observant. So when she came to the funeral and there were rabbis running around telling people what to do and the strange customs, she was very upset. And she didn't keep it a secret. Sometime during the shiva, we were sitting together and she said, I was a pain in the neck during the funeral, wasn't I? But, it was all new to me. I didn't know what was going on. But I want to tell you, I don't know why you did the funeral, the burial, the way you did, but it's so good to know that my father was buried the right way. So she's saying, I don't know why this is the right way. In fact, I don't know what the right way is. But it feels so good to know that it was done the right way. I think this is a very common feeling for people who go through that experience. What do? What's the right thing? How is anybody supposed to know? You go by your feelings? That may not be a good indicator. So people say, my father would have wanted it to be this way. Sometimes that's a little funny because for your entire life, you never asked your father anything. You never cared what your father wanted. All of a sudden, you're the big maven on what your father would want, and you're so concerned with how he would want it. So King Solomon, the wisest of all men, said, I envy the dead. And the commentaries explain, because people take them much more seriously than they take the living. So you don't care what your father says, you don't agree with him on anything, but when your father dies, all of a sudden, you want to honor him, you want to do right by him. What would he want? What did he stand for? What did he believe in? What do we write on the tombstone? You got to get it right. It's got to be perfect. How do we know what's the right thing? We don't know without the Torah telling us. We could make terrible mistakes that are not easily repaired. So let's talk a little bit about what goes on with the soul of the departed. What is the story? So we all know the Torah says that when someone close to you passes away, a parent or a child, God forbid, a brother or a sister, you sit shiva. Why do we sit shiva? Many explanations are given, but what really? The Torah tells us to mourn for 7 days and then to stop. Maybe I'm not finished mourning at 7 days. Maybe 7 days is too long for me. I can't mourn that long. So what is this arbitrary number? And why does Torah tell us how to mourn? Let people do what comes natural. What is a funeral? A funeral, literally in Hebrew, levaya, means escorting. A person passes away, you don't just send them off to the cemetery, you escort the body. That's called funeral. But when the burial has been done, you go home and that's it. Shiva means you escorted the body to its rest, now escort the soul to the soul's rest. So the Torah tells us how to stay in touch with the soul as the soul goes through its adjustments. Of course, we wouldn't know without the Torah telling us. So the Torah says it takes 7 days for the soul to get over the shock. So stay in touch, empathize with the soul, feel what the soul is feeling. So the shiva is actually a continuation of the funeral, accompanying the soul to its rest. We wouldn't know that the soul takes 7 days to get over the shock. So the Torah tells us. Torah also tells us that the first 3 days are the most painful for the soul. The next 4 days, not as painful. So in some communities, there's the custom, you don't go to visit the person to make a shiva call until the 4th day, because the first 3 days is too painful. Not every community has that custom, but we know that there's a difference between the first 3 days and the second 4 days of the shiva. That's why when the 7 days are up, the Torah says your escorting of the soul is finished. Now if you grieve and you mourn, that's your feelings, but you're no longer following the soul, because the soul has pretty much settled down after 7 days. Up until 30 days, there is still more adjustment, but not as painful. And that's why there's the shloshim period. And then for the rest of the year, the soul keeps making adjustments until it becomes completely comfortable being a soul again without a body. In fact, this is the meaning of gehenna or hell. What is hell? Who goes to hell? Why do you go to hell? Or why the hell do you go there? Hell is not punishment. Hell is the painful adjustment as the soul disconnects, detaches from the body. Because during life, the soul gets very attached to its body. The detaching is painful, but it's an adjustment. The soul, imagine, the soul comes back to the world of souls without a body. And it feels a little awkward because it's so accustomed to being a body, it doesn't remember how to be a soul. So there's an embarrassment. So when we're told you'll burn in hell, this is not the Christian idea of a big fire with demons. How does a soul burn? With a fire? The only way a soul burns is with shame, like burning with shame. So when the soul can't let go of the body and readjust to being a soul, it's embarrassing. How long does it take to make the complete adjustment into being a soul without a body? Maximum 12 months. That's why we say kaddish for 11 months. We don't want to imply that they needed the whole 12 months. But on the other hand, what if they did? so we say 11 months, but not 12, as a compliment to the soul. Some souls go through that adjustment in a week, some in a day. Depends on how stuck the soul is to the pleasures of the body. So everybody goes through that adjustment. So to say, oh, you're going to go to hell. Everybody goes through it. There's no other way to get to heaven. It's like taking the 9 to Freehold. It's the only way to get there, and it's hell. So getting to heaven can be hell. But you don't go to hell. You go through that adjustment in order to get to heaven. So, we say kaddish for that entire year, or 11 months, and then on the anniversary of the passing, the yahrzeit. Why? Because in the yahrzeit, the soul leaves the heaven that it's in and goes up to a higher heaven. And that's again an adjustment. So we say kaddish to help that adjustment. The next year, the soul goes up again to a higher level. So we say kaddish on that day to help the adjustment. So all the things that we do in connection with a passing is not for us. You want to grieve, you want to cry, you want to complain. Torah's not going to tell you how. You got to do it your way. What the Torah does tell us is what the soul is going through and what we can do for the soul. When we say Yizkor, for example, what do? We ask God to remember the soul, and we pledge to give tzedakah on their behalf. Why? It's not just a synagogue gimmick to raise some money. The one thing that the soul cannot do in heaven is physical mitzvahs. The soul can pray, the soul can study Torah, the soul can love God, but it can't do the physical mitzvah. And that hurts the soul. Because in Jewish thinking, going to heaven is not the greatest. So the expression, he's in a better place, or she's in a better place, that is so Christian. It's so not Jewish. There's no better place. Here's the best place. When you can't be here, you go there. It's a nice place. It's comfortable. It's pleasurable. But it's like a retirement home. They give you everything you need. They take very good care of you, but you're not working anymore. You're retired. The best place is right here, where you can still do something for the Creator. In heaven, the Creator takes care of you. Here, we can take care of Him. So what does the soul miss the most? The ability to give tzedakah. That's why, by Yizkor, we pledge, we'll do it for you. And that gives the soul a lot of nachas and a lot of pleasure. Now, the one thing we know about heaven, actually we know a lot, come to think of it. Because the Torah tells us, and the sages tell us, but the one thing we know for sure is that heaven is a place of peace. Right? We even say, rest in peace. The greatest pleasure of heaven is the lack of conflict, the lack of friction, the peacefulness. Maybe it's a little too peaceful. Jews don't like that. We're not used to that. We need a little something, But the peacefulness of heaven is almost like synonymous with heaven. Heaven means peace. So the worst thing for a soul in heaven is to have the family fight over an inheritance. When the soul feels that it is causing, or it is the cause of a lack of peace between brothers and sisters and so on, that's the worst thing you can do for the soul. Because if it can't even have peace, then what's heaven for? My father-in-law, Oliver Sholem, was a very special man, highly respected by all the Chassidim. When he passed away, everybody said, we got to give him the best place, right next to the Rebbe, because he was such a special man. He had left instructions with his son, I don't care where you put me, as long as it doesn't start a fight. Because that would destroy the entire peacefulness of... So the one thing we want to make sure in concern for the soul and the souls that are in heaven is that we don't disturb their peace. And disturbing their peace means not having peace among the people, the family, the community. Other than that, the soul needs nothing. The soul is not sensitive to insult or to, And that's why we're very careful when we do a eulogy, no exaggerations. The soul doesn't need exaggerated compliments. The soul is at peace. That's all it really cares. That's all it really needs. Don't argue over me. Just recently, I had an experience. There was a young couple had a terrible tragedy. They were very angry at God, at the community. They spoke to every rabbi in the community, in the city, looking for some answer, for some comfort. Didn't find it. So they used to observe Shabbos, but they stopped. The man used to put on tefillin, doesn't want to anymore. And they agreed to speak to me when I came to town. So we sat down, and it was such a horrible, their 9-year-old daughter, the cutest kid you can imagine, like an angel, had an aneurysm. Very strange at that age. It was a sudden aneurysm. She died in minutes, and they weren't even home. So you can imagine how devastated they were. So we sat down to talk. Interestingly, he said, and really he was a sweet man, he says, I am so angry at God. He stabbed me in the back. And it's because I love him that I'm so angry. It's an interesting statement, huh? So no more tefillin, no more Shabbos, I can't. I can't walk into a synagogue, I can't do it. So I was thinking, every rabbi has already spoken to him. Everybody tried. I'm sure they gave him all the good arguments, and it's not working. So I got to think of some other approach, something different. Right? So in desperation, I asked the father, has your daughter visited you yet? He says, no one asked me that. Yes, she visited me twice. Both times she was smiling, letting me know that she's happy, that she's okay. I said, actually, she's trying to tell you something else. Because to tell you that she's happy and okay, she didn't have to come twice. She's telling you that she is happy, and if you stop putting on tefillin and are angry at God because of her, she doesn't like that. She doesn't want to be the cause of your falling out with God. So she's asking you to not do that to her. The man said, so should I put on tefillin now or should I wait till I get home? When we grieve, thinking that we're suffering the loss, we stop relating to the soul that we're grieving. To really grieve properly, according to Torah, is to feel what the soul is feeling, not what you're feeling. So they both felt, that by being angry, by refusing, by being upset, that's called grieving. No, that's called being upset. To really grieve means consider what the soul is going through and what the soul needs from you now. The relationship is not over. Interestingly, the soul disconnects from the body in stages. Not all at once. Too shocking. Just like when the soul comes into the body at birth, it does it in gradual stages, otherwise it would be too shocking. So 40 days before conception, the soul is told that it's going to be born. Get over the shock. Advance notice. You got 40 days, get used to the idea. You're going to be conceived. Then there's conception. Then there's the 3rd month. Then, of course, there's the 9th month. And then there's birth. All of these are stages as the soul soaks into the body until they become one. And even after birth, for the first 30 days, the soul is still adjusting to the body. In fact, the godly soul doesn't really settle in until a girl is 12 years old or a boy is 13 years old. So it's a gradual process where the soul and body merge because they're so different. It would be too shocking to just throw them together in one move. The same is true in reverse. Every person before they pass away have a premonition. They know it's going to happen. For some it's very conscious, for some it's a little subconscious, unconscious, but they all know. And you can see from their behavior. They know. That's the first stage. Then there's the moment of death. But at the moment of death, the soul does not just leave the body. It doesn't want to leave. So again, for 7 days, it's in the body, but suffering the pain of the adjustment. Now we say the soul leaves the body, goes to heaven. So what's with the body? Why the funeral? Why the whole ceremony? It's just a body now. It's not just a body. It will never be just a body, because some part of the soul, even 1,000 years later, is still hung up on its body. So some little piece of the soul will forever be related, connected, and concerned with its body, even while the rest of the soul is in heaven. And that's why going to the cemetery, to the grave site of a tzaddik or of a grandparent, you're making a connection to that person. Because the essential part of the soul never gives up on its body. So even if you go to Israel and you go to where Avraham and Sarah are buried, are you closer to them when you're standing by their grave sites? Aren't they already long gone from the body? Never. So we treat the body with the respect that the soul demands. It's my body. It will always be my body. Be careful. Be respectful, right? So that's why we honor the body even after the soul has left, because it does not leave completely. It is still someone's body. It's not abandoned. So there is so much that goes on in the world of souls. When you're standing at the grave site, does the soul know you're there? Yes. Does it matter to the soul? Obviously. If the soul could talk, it would probably say, "What took you so long? Where were you yesterday?" You know, the way they did when they were alive. "Why didn't you call?" It's true. And by Yizkor, for example, the souls come to the synagogue. And that's why those who have both parents still alive must leave the room. So this is all very real. And we have to take it very seriously. Can I tell you one more story? Years ago, 20 years ago, 18 years ago, I flew into Argentina for a speaking tour. So I live in Minnesota, had to fly from Minnesota to New York, change planes. From New York to Miami, change planes. From Miami, we flew for some reason into Santiago, Chile, change planes, and that was not easy because nothing works there. And finally, we landed in Buenos Aires. It was a long, miserable trip. I could have been to Israel and back 3 times. And I don't fly well. I hate flying. And I was so miserable by the time we landed. Couldn't wait to get to the hotel room. The rabbi there, the shliach, picks me up, as planned, and we're going to the hotel room. All of a sudden he says to me, there's a woman in the community had a terrible tragedy. She's been severely depressed for 6 months, hasn't left her apartment, refuses to talk to anybody, but we made an appointment that we will stop at her apartment and you'll talk to her. So we'll stop at her apartment on the way to the hotel room. I was not pleased. I was furious. I was miserable at the idea. What bothered me most, you didn't warn me. You didn't ask me, is it okay after all that to stop and talk to a very depressed woman? And it has to be on the way to the hotel room? What's the emergency? Can't be tomorrow? I was really, really upset. But she's expecting us. So we have to go. I come into the apartment. It was like walking into a grave. There was no sign of life in this woman. Her eyes were dull. Her voice was monotone. There was no color in her skin. I mean, she hadn't been out of the apartment in 6 months. She was not among the living. And she tells me the tragedy. A 19-year-old son died in a car accident just before Rosh Hashanah that year. And then she tells me what a great kid he was. Respectful and thoughtful and kind and responsible. When she finishes, I said, "That's an incredible boy. And he was your son for 19 years. She was not impressed. So I said, what would it be like if there was no shock? It's the shock that destroys you. But imagine there's no shock. If God had come to you and said, there's a soul that needs to come into this world for 19 years, a very special soul. And God asks you, would you please be the mother of this very special soul for the 19 years that he needs to live? What would you have said? See, no shock. I was sure that she would say yes. She said, absolutely not. I was a little stunned, so without thinking, I said, then it's a good thing he didn't ask you, because that would have been the wrong answer. She broke down crying, a really good, cathartic cry that's been waiting 6 months to come out. And 20 minutes later, in front of my eyes, she came back to life. She came back to life. I saw the resurrection of the dead. It was such an amazing, emotional moment. It was unbelievably meaningful. So now we're back in the car. And I realize I had been very upset. What was I upset about? He didn't ask me. And I realized if he had asked me, what would I have said? I would have said, absolutely not. Would have been the wrong answer, because I wouldn't give up that experience for anything. Moral of the story? It's a good thing God doesn't ask us what kind of life we want. Because if he asked us, we would just embarrass ourselves with the wrong answer every time. Yeah, can you imagine? God says, so in your life, would you like a few challenges? No. Would you like a few hardships, like uphill battles? Absolutely not. Would you like the responsibility for a family, for kids, for mortgage? No. What would we amount to? So God does us a big favor. I'm not asking you, I'm giving you a mission. Handle it. and we become special. We rise to the occasion and we become a real mensch. So we have to thank God. There should be a special blessing every morning. Thank you for not asking me, because you have more confidence in me than I have in myself. So these two stories are a little related, because the moral of the story is, don't say no. When there's an opportunity to do something good, don't say no. And I vowed after that story, 18 years ago or whatever, I said, I'm never going to say no. You know, we all make good resolutions, but I've said no. So 18 years later, when I come to Mexico, this couple are waiting for me. But the guy who picks me up from the airport had heard the story about Argentina. So we're sitting in the car on the way to the hotel room, and he says, we're not like Argentina. We're going straight to the hotel room. I said, good, thank you. He says, at the hotel in the lobby, there's a couple waiting for you who had a terrible tragedy. See, we're not like Argentina. So I'm reminded again, I didn't want to do this year either. I really didn't. But they didn't give me a choice. They said, the man is leaving for Israel in a couple of hours. Now, you have to talk to him now. And it was magnificent. The greatness, the power, the strength that people have. All you have to do is let them show it, and they're amazing. We have a Sunday night program for VIPs that you might be interested in. It's informal, it's questions and answers, it's conversation. It's really relaxed, it's really pleasant, enjoyable, informative, and kind of community-like. It's a Sunday night program. There's a Wednesday morning program for the VIPs, and there's a Wednesday night program. All of it just conversation, casual, laid back, unscripted. So join us, take a look, click the link below, and see which of the three suits you best, and join us for some enjoyable conversation.